Well, welcome to this week's episode of Speak with People. We're so glad you're joining us. I'm actually joined today by Dr. Charity Byers from Blessing Ranch Ministry. Thank you so incredibly much for being a guest on the podcast. Wondered if you could just kind of give us who you are, what you do, just to kind of let us know about all of that.
Well, I'm a psychologist and with Blessing Ranch, and we serve pastors and other Christian leaders. Our goal is really to see them living well, leading well, and finishing well in the end. So we walk with people through all kinds of different seasons of life. Some are crisis, some are burnout or ministry issues, others are family issues or just emotional things. Sometimes it's just taking a next step up, walking through a transition, trying to figure out what's next. And sometimes it's just to pour in on a preventative note so that you can stay well and stay vital in the calling in your life.
That's wonderful. I first heard about Blessing Ranch at a conference, and then I remember sitting with you one time, kind of the first time I came out, and it was really difficult because I cried so much. I didn't even mean to cry. Like, you didn't even ask that many questions for me to cry, but I think it's just knowing, that's the kind of healing and a place of health, and so it was fantastic. So I've just appreciated so much what you do for the kingdom and for pastors
Thanks,
and
Jason.
leaders.
I appreciate it.
Kind of stuff. Well, today
glad
we're kind of diving into this idea of hard conversations. Mm-hmm. So the Speak with People podcast is all about healthy communication, and so I find myself all the time, I just counted this week. It happened this way too when I was a pastor. If I was preaching about anger, that week I would always, without a shadow of a doubt, be presented with moments where my anger. And so this week, as we talk about hard conversations, I was just even counting today the amount of times that I thought to myself, boy, I need to have that conversation. Or people have reached out and saying, hey, I need to talk to this person. So
yes,
why do you think it is that so often when we know we need to have the hard conversation, we don't? We steer clear of it. We try to avoid it. We don't want to, even though we know that's the right answer. We're nope, we're just going to push pause.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a couple really simple things that we can say about that. The first of those is that sometimes it just feels too risky, right? There's something on the line that we're not willing to risk. And I think one of those things that we're often not willing to risk is peace. Peace, I know for me, if there's any Enneagram fans out there, I'm an Enneagram 9, so the peacemaker. And peace is a high value for me. So I'm often not willing to risk the peace. I'm also, a people pleaser sometimes, as many others are. I don't want to risk somebody else's view of me or image of me by saying something that they might not like or that might be hard. So I think sometimes it just feels too risky. And I think the other simple thing is that sometimes it just feels too hard. And we all know better, but, if we're all running busy lives, we've got so much going on, we just think to ourselves, I don't have the energy for that. I just literally don't have it in me to have that conversation today. So I'll do it tomorrow, and then we don't, right?
It's so much about energy.
Yeah.
So much about it. I was having a conversation earlier today, actually with Dennis, our producer, about hard conversations, and we were just talking about that, the energy that sometimes it takes.
It's so much energy.
Yeah, I for a long time I kind of got stubborn with hard conversations, because years ago I worked at Willow Creek, and Hybels put out a book called Leadership Axioms, and one of his axioms and one of the staff axioms was, did you go the final 10% in the conversation?
Yeah,
which I think in a healthy way is really, really good.
Yeah,
but I got so stubborn because the whole place was the final 10% all the time. And to me, I was like, wait a minute, I don't know if you're coming from a really healthy place. And so are you just sharing, from your hurt? Is the final 10% your hurt?
That's a great question.
Is the final 10%, just your opinion on something? So it was for a while I was so stubborn. I was like, no, I want to make sure I'm sharing this in a healthy way.
Right.
But it really, for me, that has actually panned out to be a really good practice to kind of go,
absolutely.
Okay,
well,
did I say something that later the Holy Spirit's going to say, boy, you really should have said that whole part.
Yeah.
Well, are there any warning flags or moments when we know we need to have the hard conversation, but we start to put it off? Are there anything that we can pay attention to in our soul and our spirit to just go, okay, I probably need to start paying attention to this and get it on my radar that I need to have this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly some internal things that are cues for us, and there's also some external things. So internally, I just think it's you could say it in terms of a conviction you can't shake, or just a sense of discontentment that you can't shake. You just know something's nagging at you, and I think we so easily brush that off, especially in a high-paced world. We just ignore that too easy. But there's something there that's telling you something's wrong, and pay attention. And then I think externally, there's always cues in relationships that are telling us that we need to have the hard conversation. Right. So it's the awkwardness because there's something that's being unspoken. There's the distance because there's a conflict we haven't resolved. There's the ongoing way that person is hurting us because we haven't given them the feedback they needed to hear. There's all kinds of relational cues that are just saying, come on, get the courage and have the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. And I know in my life, so I'm not speaking from a place of judgment or snootiness, but I've gone months.
Oh yeah, I'm guilty too.
And what it's done internally.
Yeah.
And for me sometimes, I'm going to use a word that I probably haven't. I'm going to offend some people. Sorry, I haven't used since my Pentecostal days, but. Some of that will manifest in like some outward, like the stress, like. Yeah. If I don't do that, I can get canker sores, the headaches. I mean, just because I know I just need to sit down with someone face to face and just have the conversation. But it's amazing how we'll like push it off and push it off and push it off when we could experience that health, that growth,
right?
And that peace in the relationship,
right?
Which is just it's crazy.
Well, I think part of that for us is that we have such a buildup in our mind of what it's going to be, and often when you get to the table, you actually sit down and have a conversation. Oftentimes it's not anywhere near what that buildup in our mind has been.
Right.
But the longer we put it off, the further we build up the magnitude of this moment or what's on the line, and then it paralyzes us so much more. So when we actually show up and have it, right, we actually get that moment of saying, oh, actually we got on the same page, or they listened to me, and isn't that nice?
Right.
So
this just happened in my life recently. A longtime friend had a they didn't even talk. My friend just assumed this other person believes something.
Yeah.
And they, it was just this tough moment where, and they called me to talk about it. And it's hard sometimes because it's like one of those no-brainers where you're like, okay, have you gone to the person?
Right.
And I've done that a million times. Yeah. I'm like, have I gone to the person? Have I gone? Yeah. And it's like, okay, if we can just start there.
Yeah.
That same friend, they're really like, moments in my life when I worry about something, or because I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, so the individualist, romantic, even though my wife would probably disagree with that, creative, storyteller. I don't like just white walls. I want to fill it with everything. They'll always tell me when I get so worried about it. They're like, "Well, what are they going to do? Take away your birthday?"
Take away your birthday. That's great.
And I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. They can't,
Right. I mean, obviously, it doesn't always go well. There are those moments where it goes downhill. It's an unhealthy ending. But more often than not, I think I've been surprised when I've actually sat down to have the hard conversation that it goes better than I would have expected.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some steps that we can take, to get to that place where we go, okay, I need to have that hard conversation? Because sometimes I feel like people are like, or myself included, I need to ask some advice first from some trusted friends, and then I need to pray about it, and then I need to take some walks and think about it. What are some healthy, practices or habits to kind of lead us up to that hard conversation?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think some simple things, but I think one is just get really clear with what you want to say. And, sometimes we spend so much of our energy just like gearing up to have it and getting the courage, and then we forget to actually be mindful of what we want to communicate.
Yep.
And so we show up into that room and we fumble our way through it, and then again, it doesn't produce the outcome that we would have hoped for. So we need to be really clear about what we want to communicate. And part of that is not just getting our own thoughts ordered, but taking time to really think through how what we're going to communicate might impact the person that we're speaking to. So it's not about having to, put on the kid gloves and be too careful with what we say, but it is about being strategic about the way we present things, perhaps knowing who this person is, how they think, maybe a bit of their story and how this might intersect.
Yep.
So that can really set us up for the win. So
Yep.
getting our own thoughts organized, can be an important part of that. And I think the other simple thing is to get our hearts right before we go into that conversation.
Yeah.
And so that's another part of the battle that sometimes we don't often give enough attention to because we're just, again, so consumed with the courage or
Yep.
getting ready to go. But getting our hearts right means that we need to enter that room with a posture of grace and humility and boldness
Yep.
and clarity. And so, it depends on the scenario, of course, but sometimes we're walking into a room with somebody who we've had a lot of anger towards, and we need to be able to be in a place where we can actually speak with grace and truth in that
Yeah.
moment. Or maybe it's somebody that we're just really intimidated by, and we need to walk into that room with boldness and courage and not just intimidation. So preparing our hearts is a really important ingredient in that as well.
Yeah. I find the best steps is to go on social media first and err in kind of like non-committal, not naming them kind of way, the situation, and then ask for social media's advice. Sorry, I'm trying to be serious as I say this because you just gave me such great gold. But as I was thinking about that, I'm like, the millions of times that I've wanted to share on social media, or I've seen other adults share. It's like, wait a minute, this is not the right platform to go air our grievances this way. Yeah.
Right. Well, obviously, we're often doing that without our hearts right. So, our emotionality is coming out in that. And then obviously, people can often see through when we're trying to veil what we're saying or veil the story. People know.
Right.
So clearly not the right medium to prepare our hearts and our minds for that conversation.
Right. Oh, what would the world be like if it just Facebook turned off tomorrow and we had to go back to learning emotional intelligence without putting it online.
There you go.
Yeah, that'd be. So, is there a difference between having the hard conversation and having a hard, healthy conversation?
Oh yeah, 100%. There's a big difference between those things. Just a hard conversation is one where we might talk about really difficult things, but we actually do damage through that conversation. A hard, healthy conversation is we can talk about really difficult things, but we produce growth or resolution through that conversation.
Yes. Yeah, in leadership circles, and as I look back over the years of leading and then being led, I've worked for some really driven, type A, 8s, high Ds, like take the world. And, I love that. I can remember, 12, 14 years ago working for someone, and I felt like, and they would admit it, if the thought crossed their mind, they would immediately share it without processing, thinking it through, maybe bathing in prayer. How long do you think, when we want to have that healthy, hard conversation, how long should that time period be as we pray about it, think about it? Is there even wisdom in before just sharing it? Okay, taking a deep breath, praying about it, thinking about it.
Yeah, there at least needs to be a moment between an idea and an action.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to be days that we're sitting here deliberating about that, because that ends up just being more of paralysis. But we do need to take at least a moment, like you said, just to take that deep breath, because we've got to check ourselves. What's my motivation in having this conversation? Is it for me just to get something off my chest and, put this person in their place, and that would lead perhaps into the unproductive, damaging, outcome? Or is this for us to resolve something, or to come to some mutual understanding, or to give some needed feedback? And so we at least have to pause and, take a moment to check our motivation. So that doesn't have to be a lengthy period of time. And I think you have to know yourself in that a little bit. So if you tend to be an impulsive person, where you find yourself perhaps a little bit like the boss you described, where I just say whatever comes to mind, and I look back on, the last few weeks of my life, and I'm like, boy, I regret that conversation, and I regret that one, then you're probably a person who needs to build in a lengthier amount of time between your idea and your action. So that might just be a couple of hours to go take a deep breath, reflect, and maybe talk to somebody else.
Yeah.
But if you're, somebody who stays a little bit more measured in those things, then just simply taking a few moments to check your motivation can be sufficient.
Yeah. I think of sometimes as I think of myself, and sharing and the people I've led and being on teams, I think, oh yeah, I'm a 4. Like I don't upset anybody. I'm lovable. The opposite happens with me because sometimes I let my words get way ahead of me, that I actually offend through humor or sarcasm, or so on the flip end of like abusive words that are like just I've done just as much damage with just sitting around, we're joking around, and then something comes out and I'm like, no, please come back in. And so it's been interesting learning as people have come back to me and said, hey, I know you're only joking, but like that really hurt.
Yeah. So how has that impacted you as you think about this idea of taking time to weigh your words or discern the right kind of conversations to have?
Yeah, for me, just what you talked about, like I need to make sure that I'm well, it's James, I need to take time to be slow to speak, quick to listen. Quick to listen? Slow to speak? Yeah.
Yeah, quick to listen.
Yeah, I went to Bible
sounds
college.
right.
Sorry. But I need to do that, and I need to remind myself of that because I am an emotional person, so I get so wrapped up into it. So a lot of times for me, if I'm going to have the hard conversation, and I blame it on not being the sharpest tool in the shed. So I'm not going to wow you with my test scores and those kind of things. I do an awful lot of reading, and I try to dive into that way. But I'll type everything out so I can. So instead of just going off the cuff, I've thought it through.
Yep.
And what that process does for me as well is like, okay, because sometimes I've gone to those times I didn't have the courage to say what I needed to say.
Yeah.
So when I put it on paper, okay, that kind of changed everything. And I brought the paper with me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember years ago working with another coworker who taught me to do the same thing, and I thought, well, this is kind of weird. Like, we're walking into a professional meeting, and you've got your notes with you, but what he really taught me was the value of that, like you're saying, that it can come for people on both sides of the spectrum. Those who just speak too quickly need to slow down and kind of stay in tune with what they intend to say, and for someone like me who can withhold a little bit too much, it calls me to courage to say, you haven't said that yet, you better say it. So I just resonate with that it might seem a little bit weird interpersonally, but it's such a valuable tool to make sure that the right heart is communicated in the conversation.
And I think some of it comes with age. I know in my 20s, even though like I was so quick to just blurt out words and share my opinion, there was so much I held back because I was like, I don't know, what am I gonna, and as the older I've gotten, it's like, okay, wait a minute, I do have something to offer here and something to share. I do want to make sure I'm saying it, in a healthy way. I want to make sure I've bathed it in prayer, and I share it in a way that honors both the relationship and both of our lives. When it comes to receiving the hard conversation, so someone wants to the best is when they text you and they're like, hey, do you have time next week? I have something tough I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah, give me a whole week to think about that. Thanks.
I had to learn as a pastor years ago of like, well, can you tell me what you want to talk about? Just so, or what can I be prepared for? But what can we do to ready ourselves? Is there anything, is there anything during that can kind of make the whole conversation honoring, and we can be as receptive as possible.
Well, I love your suggestion. I think that's a great practical step to avoid yourself from making up stories about what's about to happen. So asking for some information, that's a great suggestion. I think just in terms of the posture that we need to prepare ourselves with, the words that I would put to that is to try to adopt a spirit of secure humility. So what I mean by that is, obviously humility is pretty obvious. We need to come in, ready to listen, ready to receive. But the secure part is an important part of that puzzle because it means we need to be secure in who we are. We need to trust that even if this person may have some negative feedback, it's okay. We can receive that. We can take that in without it having to threaten everything about who we are. And that posture is really important so that we actually listen, so that we actually avoid the biggest nightmare of these conversations, which is defensiveness. And so I think, we need to prepare our hearts with that idea of, okay, I know who I am. I'm not perfect. I may have actually made a mistake, offended this person, whatever it is. That can be true, and yet I'm still secure enough to listen and receive in an authentic way.
Yeah.
And so, practically when we show up
huge.
into that room, the expression of secure humility is, first simply to be a great listener, and we need to enter that conversation giving them the floor. Let them share, let them express, and things inside of us may be, pushing back on that the whole time, thinking that's not true or that's not who I am. But we need to, again, be slow to speak and give them an opportunity to share their heart. And if we jump in too quickly into that with explanation, justification, right, we've just defended ourselves and we've invalidated them completely and shut down any opportunity for productive resolution. And so that posture leads us first into listening. And then when we speak, there's a big difference between defending yourself and creating understanding. And so it helps us walk that fine line where, again, I might share a different side to the story. I might share where I was coming from. But the way that I do that sounds really different when it comes from secure humility than when it comes out of defensiveness.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Is there a way to, and I don't know if it's one personality over another, but is there a way to go, because in my experience, some people they turn every conversation into the hard conversation. Like they feel like every moment has to, be that. So are there any checks where you're like, okay, I was hurt by this at this level, or, this was said and it wasn't truth. I'm just like, maybe some help for the person who, maybe they don't know that they overshare, or they're always thinking that every conversation has to be hard, but is there a way to go, okay, I got to center in on this specifically? Does that make sense?
So are you speaking about the person who has that tendency or the one who's receiving that from
So
someone
I
else?
jumped on you. We were talking about the one receiving, and then I went to the person because I was thinking about sitting there going, okay, the one receiving, but then there's that person who, like it's like the overshare. So is there a way to go, okay, like unless it checks these boxes, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna overshare.
Well, I think one thing we can always be watching out for is, have we had this conversation before?
Yeah.
So sometimes there's something unresolved in us, and it keeps us just sort of harping on the same thing or giving the same feedback, bringing up the same conversation with somebody else. And so we need to check ourselves and say, have I had this conversation before? And if the answer is no, it means usually one of two things. One, there's just something unresolved inside of me. Like, I'm still dealing with my own guilt, so I keep bringing this up. Or I'm still angry with you, so I keep bringing this up. Or it could be, secondly, that we just haven't gotten relational resolution yet. And so there's something missing there. But anyhow, that's just one good checkpoint is, have we had this conversation before? And I think the second thing is, just to really do our best to read the room.
Yeah.
What feedback am I getting from this other person? Are they checked out? Are they checked out? Are they, are they annoyed by this? Or are they actually deeply listening as if this is new information, important information? Because if we're not getting that interpersonal feedback, then it might be a cue that we're in that oversharing or just repetitive pattern of communication.
Ooh, that's really good to pay attention to. Years ago, a coach taught me, if I was having a one-on-one with somebody that I'm leading, and they want to have the hard conversation with me, there are some body posture things that I could do. Definitely not, sitting with my arms crossed while listening to the.
Sure. Does
that resonate with you?
Absolutely.
They also said, maybe as you sit with your hands palm up, as kind of a thought of like, okay, I'm going to be open
receptivity.
to...
Yeah, I think that one absolutely can be even more for our own good than for what we communicate, but it is something as a signal to ourselves, right, of openness and receptivity. Yeah, but, just that body language is so important into what we communicate with other people. So obvious things, of course, are eye contact. And then just the leaning in posture, not leaning back, but leaning in.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned a couple of great things already.
When can we get to the place in our leadership, in our lives, where we view these moments? These moments can be really beautiful for our own growth. And I guess I didn't view that for years. I thought, oh man, these hard leadership moments, they're just so difficult. And then something switched along the line where I went, wait a minute, this is like a huge moment where God's teaching me, or God's, helping me get to that next place in my leadership or discipleship, or, so what, how do we get to that place where the switch can, be turned on, where we're like, okay, wait a minute, I'm not looking at this as the world's out to get me. I can't believe this is happening, but this is actually probably a beautiful moment.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just embracing this idea that you're talking about, that we refer to it as parallel process. And that just simply means that God must first do in us what he's going to do through us for others. And so it's within these moments of hard leadership lessons, hard conversations, that there's an opportunity for us to face ourselves. Yeah. Right? And so, again, for me as a peacemaker, there's all kinds of things that hard conversations push on in me. And one of those is just relational peace, and another is image that others have of me. Those are things that I wrestle with sometimes. Yeah. And so each time I'm pushed to have a hard conversation, not only am I learning communication skills, but I'm learning how to manage my own heart. Yeah. And so it's through those things that, then we can speak, out of our own learnings, our own lessons, and, share those with other people down the road. And so I think the point just simply is being able to trust and embrace that this is what happens through those hard conversations, that there is a parallel process happening in us that is for a greater purpose in our own leadership or life down the road. And so it helps us see those moments differently, like you're saying, not just as our enemy, not just as another difficult thing to get through, but as an opportunity to learn and to grow personally, as we also hopefully better a relationship.
Wow. The one big regret I have from this interview is that I didn't have a notepad, but I guess we're recording this, so I can go back through and I could do it. Well, I'll end there. This was absolutely fantastic. I mean, thank you for sharing with us Jason. In this conversation, type way. I know there's this topic we could dive into, so many more things, but it's just amazing how many people that I talk to, or especially years as a pastor, talk to, where it really does come down to, hey, you just need to have the hard conversation. I guess the last thing I ask you is this, and people do ask me this a lot. When it comes to the hard conversation, can't a text message suffice?
No.
Yes.
No, of course not.
Yeah, of course.
Of course not.
Of course. And I say that jokingly, but also in a we all kind of wish we could take.
Oh yeah, I wish I could get away with that. Yeah. I would be so much more comfortable. Yeah. But no, they need to hear your heart. They need to see your face, and they need to hear the tone of your voice to know really what message you're truly communicating.
Absolutely. Well, I don't have the words in a very, I don't know, I guess I'm stumbling over my words, because I just want to say thank you, because what you and this place has done for my own life and soul and leadership has been, I wish I had the words, I'm somebody who uses the words, but thank
my
you.
Pleasure.
My
really
pleasure. Appreciate all you do for the kingdom, and for pastors and ministry leaders, and my own family. So
thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Trey. Appreciate it.
Thanks, you too.